Alrighty everyone, welcome back. It is now October 5th of 2023, and given that Disney is anticipating a couple of other box office failures on their end, including The Marvels and Snow White the live-action remake, Disney is not looking too good, not just for this year, but for also the beginning of 2024 to set everything up there with Bob Iger. This is Mike Zero. Subscribe if you're new and like this video to see future updates. I'm also on Twitter at Mike01. I thank you all so very much for the great and kind support. And one thing about director Marc Webb of Snow White is that we know that this is an individual that fully supports writer Greta Gerwig, who, by the way, created the entire story with the help of Aaron Wilson. They crafted the overall reimagining of Snow White the way it is now, everything ranging from Zegler being cast as Snow White to how the 7 dwarfs are going to be portrayed as now magical creatures, and diverting from the source material. It wasn't just Disney pressing on this. Greta Gerwig and Marc Webb fully supported that idea and really doubled down on how that was going to be executed on film. Now, focusing on Marc Webb, there is a lot of drama happening right now behind closed doors over at Disney and how it really concerns his future as a filmmaker, not just in Hollywood, but also specifically in Disney. Let's get to the actual basics and specifics here. Now, one thing about Marc Webb, you may or may not know him, he created the Amazing Spider-Man movies as well as 500 Days of Summer. Those are really his 3 main movies he's known for. Besides that, I bet if you go to any random person and say, who is director Marc Webb, they probably would have never heard his name before, don't even know who he is. So, moving onwards, alright? Now, on top of all of that, with Snow White 24 going through major revisions and re-edits right now by Disney, one major development has to do with Snow White director Marc Webb and what Disney recently did with himself as a creator. As it turns out, Marc Webb was attached to direct one of the spy film movies that Disney is preparing along with their new untitled animated movie that will compete against the new Shrek film by DreamWorks, which, by the way, it's unclear if it's a reboot, a spin-off, or a sequel. That's currently up in the air. After the ongoing struggles with Snow White 24, Disney recently decided to fire Marc Webb from all existing Disney projects, hence banishing him from Disney altogether, and even his 4-movie deal has now been finalized for getting shelved, as those Snow White movies are no more to begin with. After his Snow White universe fell apart, Disney decided it was best to exclude him from all things Disney. Marc Webb was also going to direct an episode for new Star Wars TV shows that will be announced by next year, that he was also going to actually take part in, that he was recently removed from entirely due to the ongoing test screening failures for Snow White 24. What may come across as scapegoating by Disney for sure, Webb also fully supports the train wreck that is Snow White. Now, let me just say one thing here quick, guys, about Marc Webb before I get to the next big piece about this, is that we know that Marc Webb fully supports Disney's woke agenda with Snow White. We also know that he fully supports Greta Gerwig for doing what she is doing with the overall story and the character arcs in this movie that are really going to be very unorganized and very messy, to say things, alright? Now, one thing about everything ranging from the test screenings to the plot leaks to the overall re-edits of this film, you can see how inconsistent this movie really is on a production scale, and how Disney really has little to no confidence about this film for several reasons. We know that Bob Iger and the Disney Board of Directors, they're going to take a big hit by this. There's no doubt about that. If it won't stop live-action remakes, it most certainly will tarnish the production value of future live-action remakes. There's no doubt about that. If this movie certainly is going to be the worst box office failure of all time for Disney, that's going to follow them for decades. It's going to be known in, like, textbooks and filmmaking. It's going to be that level of bad. Now, one thing about this is that we know that Bob Iger is doing everything that he can to salvage this movie. This includes the emergency plan that they recently greenlit. That is, of course, going to include hiding the actors of the 7 magical creatures from the world premiere of Snow White, and engaging very few times in interviews with those like Access Hollywood and Empire, stuff like that. But on top of that, this is where matters get even more severe about director Marc Webb, and exactly what's happening between himself and the Disney heads, and what they really are doing to kind of balance things out with this whole drama that's happening with Snow White. Now, of course, what may come across as ongoing drama for sure, Webb also fully supports Greta Gerwig. As of now, Webb will only be allowed to promote his one movie, that of course being Snow White from Disney, and that it is the rest of his role at the company. No movies or TV shows will now be handed down to him afterward. Webb was reportedly banking on Disney to boost his directing career after his failure with Sony and Amazing Spider-Man 2 getting cancelled. Ironically, the same happened with Snow White sequels being planned and then cancelled. Disney is now focusing on remaking Snow White with a brand new cast in the future, disconnected, of course, from the Zegler movie. Webb is also said to be very angered over this decision, and it was creating, of course, more drama at Disney than they could even handle at this point based on what's going on with Gal and Rachel. Disney is now in search of a new director to take on the spy film franchise and the new animated feature along with the Star Wars TV show with a handful of episodes that is currently untitled, which may very well be Project Bluepoint. This was a decision made by Iger and the board to part ways from Marc Webb for good. Now, I don't know if you guys have been filled in, we talked about this 3 weeks ago. They are creating a spy film franchise to compete against Paramount and Skydance, because Tom Cruise announced about 2 months ago that these Mission Impossible movies, they're going to keep on coming. Even if Ethan Hunt retires, they're going to keep making these movies even if he won't be at the forefront. And so Disney got very much, challenged over that. They felt very challenged about their success, and we know that Tom Cruise is a top-tier creator at this point. He's not just an actor. I mean, this guy puts together full-fledged movies. So, interestingly enough, Marc Webb getting the boot from Disney, I feel, is the right choice. I'm not defending Disney by any means. They are just using this to scapegoat. There's no doubt about that. They always need somebody to point the finger at, somebody to blame. And you know what? It really makes me wonder what is going to happen to Greta Gerwig, the writer of Snow White. Is she going to get any more gigs in the future? Well, we probably will be finding out more about that in the coming weeks. We'll keep you guys filled in on about that. But so far, it's crickets. There's nothing really going on with Greta Gerwig, which really makes you wonder, what's that all about? I think I can guess pretty well. But what's interesting about Snow White 24, they're not only cutting their budget from the marketing, but they're also cutting out a lot of scenes from this movie, shaving down the running time, rearranging everything, thinking that it's going to help this film or fix it. It's not. And at most, they could probably get away with cutting out maybe some sequences here and there, but that's about it. You really can't get rid of Snow White as the main character. There's no way to go around doing that. So anyway, guys, I would like to hear what you have to say about this below in the comments, and if you guys did enjoy the content for today, make sure to drop a thumbs up on this video to support the channel, and I will catch you guys next time.
Night to moon, we hear